Hi, my name is Mindy Johnson and welcome to the 2021 Spark Animation Festival. We are elated that you've joined in and we appreciate your continued support in the vital efforts across the entire Spark platform, featuring a tremendous range of programs and content offered all throughout the year. Within our legacy track, it's my great pleasure to introduce a once-in-a-lifetime panel exploring a very significant time period in the history of Walt Disney Feature Animation, now celebrating the anniversaries of several films from the 1980s and 90s, which redefined our collective animated past. Joining us is a stellar panel of directors whose talents shaped this landmark renaissance in animation history. And to lead this epic group, we are so pleased to have the legendary producer behind such classics as Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, I know the list gets better and better, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and an award-winning director in his own right. Please help me welcome the great Don Hahn.
Yay!
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, please. Thank you, Mindy. I appreciate that. Well, welcome, everybody. It's so good to see you. We've already forced John Musker out of the room, which is, I thought would happen later in the morning. But yeah, I don't know. This happens frequently.
I think I can vouch for that.
Yeah. Yes. John Musker, welcome back.
Thank you.
It's good to see you. I am really, really happy. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and you guys have been great to tune in and help out. Let me just introduce you, and then we'll go into a slugfest of memories. First, Ron Clements, John Musker, directors of everything. Basil of Baker Street, Great Mouse Detective, both of those. The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Hercules, Treasure Planet, Princess and the Frog, Moana, and more. Good to see you guys. Welcome.
See you, Don.
Roger Allers, friend and director of The Prophet and Open Season, and the Academy Award nominated short Little Match Girl, which I love, and a film called The Lion King, which he also co-wrote the stage show of The Lion King with Irene Mecchi. Rob Minkoff, wow, Tommy Trouble, Lion King, one of my favorite movies, Stuart Little, which I love still to this day. Haunted Mansion, Peabody and Sherman, Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. It really has done a lot for the animation industry. More on that later. Kirk Wise, Gary Trousdale, Cranium Command, which is a short film that gave them their start, short film that played at Epcot Center. Beauty and the Beast, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Atlantis. Ladies and gentlemen, it's great to have you here. Lorna, Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron, nominated for Best Picture, Best Animated Picture. And your list of credits as writer, story artist, animator on dozens of movies is pretty stunning, as are you. So thank you for being here. And I think that's everybody. Joining us in a few minutes will be the director of Brave, Brenda Chapman, who is also remarkable. So we'll lean on her when she logs in. I wanted to start out with the Renaissance is kind of our topic today, the Renaissance of animation, which I promised everyone who is listening was not a term we ever spoke when we were in the so-called Renaissance of animation.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, wow, this Renaissance is sure terrific.
I thought it was the Reformation. I was completely.
Yeah, the Reformation was a few years later. Yeah,
there's an eviction notice hammered to the door.
Yeah, I think it was more
Martin Luther
to make a movie that someone would go see. It was kind of a dream.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Ron, you said this a while ago, nobody would be caught dead in a Disney movie, Disney animated movie, especially if it was a date night or something like that. So I wanted to talk about the circumstances that kind of hatched all this, going back to maybe the 70s or whatever. Anyone who wants to jump in here, I don't know, Ron and John, you occur to me, Lorna as well, kind of what the world was like. There were very few animated films being made. If you were in animation, you worked possibly for Ralph Bakshi or Filmation. Occasionally, a movie like Tron would pop up, which Roger, you worked on. But it was Slim Pickens, I think, is the
Right, yeah.
actor's name
Yeah.
that comes to mind. So what was that? I mean, how was the foundation of this era?
Well, I was there pretty early, and Don, you were there pretty early. I was there before CalArts had its character animation program, which was a huge deal
Wow.
in terms of the Disney Renaissance. But I actually came a little before that. Lorna actually was there before that too. It kind of started in the 70s with Disney starting to recruit new people. They started an animation training program. Up to that point, the doors had been closed, I think, for years and years. And it was really after Walt Disney died, I think from what I understand, there was talk about even just shutting animation down, that they might just end it. After the veteran animators, the 9 old men, after they passed on, they might just let it go. And from what I understand, I think the reason they didn't was the Jungle Book, which turned out to be much more successful, I think, than anybody anticipated. And because of the Jungle Book, I think they decided, hey, maybe we should keep this going. So they started this program. I got into it pretty early, along with people like Andy Gaskell and Glenn Keane, and also Don Bluth and John Pomeroy. And it was very different. Things moved very slowly. The first feature I worked on was The Rescuers, which probably took about 4 years to make, which was kind of about average. And Disney it was kind of a laissez-faire atmosphere. The staff was small, and they would release the films when they were done. It was like there wasn't a lot of anticipation. It was sort of like, we keep going. When the film's done, we'll put it in theaters.
Yeah.
And I'd say that continued through Fox and the Hound, and the Black Cauldron. Ron Miller was our boss, who was Disney's son-in-law, and was a great guy. But it was things just moved slowly, very
Yes, they
slowly.
did. Yes, they did. Lorna, I remember, I'm lucky enough to have known you from that time. And the studio also made a point to recruit, as shocking as it may seem, to recruit women animators. Linda Miller comes to mind, you, Emily Giuliano, Heidi Goodell. What was that time like for you? Because, women in animation at the time was sadly an unusual thing.
It really was. And I have to say, a lot of that kind of help forward was with Don Bluth. Once we were able to work on the small one, the Christmas short, that was kind of the go forward for female animators to get, really a chance to show what they could do. And I feel that was a tremendous gift at the time. As you said, there were very few women animators. And when I first came to Disney in their training program, I came in there about, I think it might have been 1972 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I had, died and gone to heaven. And I made the first round of testing. I mean, I had to do an animation test, which scared the crap out of me, frankly. I didn't understand three-dimensional, drawing. It was all proscenium, and Eric Larson was my mentor. So he really was, the grandfather who helped me. And then the second round, they were doing The Fox and the Hound at the time, and I thought I'd become an in-betweener. I didn't make the second round. A couple of
really? I didn't know that. Amazing.
Yeah, and my little test wasn't Disney enough, and that just broke my heart. And so I went to Filmation. Don Bluth actually said, "Don't
Really? Oh man.
Go to Filmation." And I thought, oh man, I'm
Yeah.
going to Devil's Island, and it really felt like that.
There were no guarantees, and there were a fair amount of people. Hi, Brenda. Brenda Chapman has joined us. We gave you a brief introduction before, but we are honored to have you here.
Thank you. Is the panel going now, or is
yes,
this?
Yes, we're
so
recording. So please.
Everybody look at Brenda.
Actually, Brenda, your timing isn't bad. We were talking to Lorna slightly about starting in the 70s in her case, and how rare it was to have women in animation, and how Don Bluth kind of contributed to that. Your beginnings and being a woman in the story department, or contributing to these movies at all, was just so rare, because it was such a boys' club for such a long time. And I hopefully that's done with. But what was your experience starting out?
Um, well, I've always said I feel like I was in a bubble at Disney because I felt so welcomed that it didn't make a difference. The only hiccup I had was in my entrance interview with I won't even say his name, but he was running it, but he took me in. I was out of CalArts, and people had seen my student film, and they were talking about hiring me as a trainee. And I was in his office, and he said, well, the only reason you're here is because you're a woman, and because I'm getting flack from the guys upstairs because we don't have any women in the story department. And that the guys upstairs, I think, were Jeffrey and Frank and those guys. They'd taken a look, and I was the right price because I was fresh out of school training. And if it didn't work out in 6 weeks, I'm out. They'll get somebody else.
Oh my God!
And I never really said. I was so horrified. I didn't say anything, and I thought, well, I'm just going to work really hard and try to stay. And to be honest, once I got past that, I felt nothing of any difference. I was just part of the team, and everyone was super great and nice. And Rob was my mentor to start, and it was. I just felt like I was in a bubble. And I remember Gary saying once, a couple of years down the road, looking around going, you realize you're the only woman in the room? oh yeah. Oh, well, okay. And we just kept going. So I don't know if I was just naive or just, it just didn't seem to be an issue. I felt like I was absolutely embraced and feel very, very fortunate for that.
Yeah. Oh man, what a story! What a beginning.
I would say just that Brenda did a beautiful test in terms of at her CalArts tests, and I guess a lot of people here did CalArts tests that are from CalArts that sort of were the things that got them into the studio. But I know John and I were really impressed with the test that you did. It was different than most of the tests. It was very emotional.
Thank you.
That's surprising. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's talk about CalArts a little bit because Rob, Kirk, Gary, you guys came through that program. And when you look back, that Walt Disney kind of was prescient about what the effect would be of that program. Although I think when you guys graduated, was it like the world was flush with animation jobs, or what was that like?
No, when I was, yeah. I mean, they had that show every year. They called it at the time they called it the Disney show because Disney was the only game in town, and Disney would send their producers and scouts and look at the student films. And it had been kind of tradition that after every show, a period of a day or three would go by, and a handful of students would be picked as we like him, we like her, come in, do training, you're hired, whatever. And when we got there, Rob and Kirk can attest to this as well. We went to the Disney show and everybody's like really excited, and here they are, they're watching our films, and they said, well, thank you very much, but we're all full, and they left.
Yeah. What I recall was that this was in 1982. Is that we had done the show, and then the response back from Disney was all the films were too dark. Oh. And there was kind of an edginess to all of them, one of which was about Santa Claus being a kind of a taskmaster, and all the elves are complaining about being overworked and wanting to start a union. And then when they're flying on Christmas Eve in the sleigh, the elves cut the reindeer loose and Santa Claus plummets to his death.
Gary Conrad.
Gary Conrad, exactly.
Jack Hanna was having none of that.
Well, yeah, so all of these films had a kind of an edgy darkness to them, which was actually, I think, directly attributable to Tim Burton, who had just left in our, Kirk and my first year was 1980, and in that first year, they were playing Stalk of the Celery Monster, which was Tim Burton's student film, on constant rotation in the Bijou. And so we all would go and you'd watch this, great, amazing, imaginative, crazy Frankenstein thing, which was totally every bit of Tim Burton's sensibility was like in this student film, and we all watch it. We're like, wow, that's so cool, and so, you know, and somehow like that sort of seeped into everybody's, you know, work.
Funny, Kirk.
Yeah, I I remember having a similar experience. I was just 1 year behind Rob. It's funny. It's like I started the program. Rob started the program in 1980. I started it in 81, and Gary was just a year ahead of me. So we were all there around the same time, and you know, I loved CalArts. I loved the atmosphere. I loved being with so many other artists, you know, around my same age who all grew up with the same influences, and it was such a fertile ground for sharing ideas and you know, basically teaching each other animation. You know, that year that I remember that producer show in '82 when Disney said, you know, no room, basically said no room at the inn, and it was kind of disappointing because as Gary pointed out, there was this kind of unwritten tradition of, well, every year a few students are going to be pulled into the Disney training program on the lot, and this didn't happen. But you know, me and my classmates just looked at each other and shrugged our shoulders and said, well, guess we're coming back next year. And I'm actually really glad in my sake, because in my third year, that's when Hal Ambro was added to the faculty.
Right.
And I learned so much about animation from Hal Ambro that I was able to like raise my game and just the overall quality level of my student film the following year. That it actually did get noticed. It got noticed by Daryl Van Sitters. You know, God bless him.
Yeah.
I want to throw one little bit of trivia that I think
Please.
is worth keep noting, is that I first heard about CalArts from Kirk when we were in high school, because Kirk and
That's
I.
right.
You went to school together.
No, Kirk and I went to high school together. And then Kirk came to me one day and said, oh my God, because we loved animation and we loved drawing, and that's how we became friends at the Children's Theater. But then he said, oh my God, there's this school that teaches animation called CalArts. And it was like, wow, that's so amazing. And so we actually made a film together in high school that I used to submit my first year, and I think Kirk the next year.
Yeah, it was really genuinely terrible. It was basically
And let's play that right now.
Yeah, it was a pencil test of basically like recycled Tex Avery gags, because I think both Rob and I were in a big Tex Avery phase at that time.
Yeah, we all go through it.
But you know, we did it. I mean, we worked every day after school for something like you know, couple 3 months, and actually had something to show for it at the end of it. As
amazing,
as primitive as it might have been.
One last bit of trivia I have to throw in there is that I found out not that long ago, which is crazy, is that Ollie Johnson went to Pali High School,
which was Rob and I's alma mater.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
In the 30s.
Wow.
I know. So weird.
Well, in terms of that, I have to mention that Art Babbitt is from my hometown of Sioux City, Iowa.
Sioux City, Iowa.
And I didn't find out that until later. And I took a union class that Art Babbitt taught when I first went to California before I got into Disney.
Well, I did want to mention
world.
Walt Disney was born in Chicago, and I'm from Chicago.
I also am from Chicago, proudly the hometown of John Musker.
You're from Illinois.
Yeah, yeah.
You are, that's true.
From the vast expanse of Illinois.
All right, well, that's our panel for today. Thanks, everyone. Roger Allers, you came to the studio in an unusual way. You worked with on one of the few independent animated films, which now are pretty common, but then was not. Steve Lisberger was doing Animal Olympics in Boston.
We started in Boston and then moved out to Venice Beach.
Yeah, and I don't know if I met you probably a little bit after that when you worked on Tron at the studio. And then we roped you into working on probably Oliver and Company or something around there. But what was your kind of entrance into that time? Because you came in not through CalArts, but through kind of a back door.
I mean, this is going to age me, but when I finished high school and was looking for a place to go to college, there was not CalArts. It was still Chouinard. So it wasn't, I don't even think there was there an animation program there? I don't know. I wound up applying to Art Center because that's where the only place I knew that there was animation classes.
Yes.
So I applied there and then was rejected. And it was like, oh, really? Oh, God. So, and they went and they said, well, just take some, a couple of years at a liberal arts school and then apply later. So I wound up just taking I wound up going to school in Arizona State University. So basically, I'm just self-taught. As a kid, I sent away for an art kit from Disneyland, an animation kit, which had all this stuff about stretching, and timing, and blah. So I was doing all that stuff on my own, like at 12. And then it was later, I was a drawing and painting major, a fine arts major. But
yeah, it's funny that rejection is kind of a recurring theme, I think, with pretty much all of us and any artist. But
examine our dating lives, right? Yeah,
it's common. But yeah, and then you came to Disney through Tron, then.
Well, let's see. So anyway, long story. Travel, all sorts of things. Winding up in Boston, just working in a frame shop. But then I heard about a little animation studio, went in and applied and got hired. Actually, I had talked my way into just sitting in on an animation class at Harvard for one semester.
Really?
Somebody had told me about Chris Martin, who was doing an animation class. So I went in and in my naivete, I said, well, I'm not a student here, but I'd really love to go to your class. Is there a way to do it? And he was really, you have to be really young, dumb, and naive to actually have all the luck in the world, I think. And he said, well, go off, do a design, draw up a little idea for a little 10-second animated bit. So I did. I went off, did a little storyboard, brought it back and went, okay, yeah, you can sit in, you can make a film, the whole thing, free. So I went to Harvard, you see. And yeah. So I had a little 10-second reel of a little film at the very end of it when I heard about this other studio. So I took that in and my college portfolio of drawings and got hired. And basically, we started in just right away doing children's television shows, like animated educational shows, like Make-A-Wish and Sesame Street and things like that, which were little bits of animation. And so you'd get a whole show and you did everything yourself. So you did the storyboarding, you did the character design, you did the animation, you did the cleanup, you did the cells, you did the painting, you did the filming, everything all yourself. So that was my
Never Make-A-Wish.
Yay!
Yeah, Roger, we grew up on that.
Yeah, now you're really aging me there, Rob.
The host with the guitar.
Yes.
It was Tom Chapin. Tom Chapin, who was Harry
Chapin's brother.
Really? Tom Chapin? Boy, the trivia is spectacular.
Yes.
Oh, man. Hey, John
Anyway,
Musker,
so that led later on to finally we were going to do a feature, and Steve Lisberger had two ideas. One to do the Animal Olympics, which was going to be cut into the actual Olympic coverage.
Right.
Well, now let's cut back to the animal side of Olympics, and in the real coverage.
Yeah, which is always a crowd favorite.
The year we broke out of the Olympics.
Yeah, that's what got screwed up. We worked on the whole thing. We couldn't get enough talent in Boston, but we had grabbed some Canadians and came out to California, and then we got some Disney. What would I call them? Disney dropouts? No, that's not a way to call them.
Freelance.
No, it's well, they had decided to leave. So there was Bill Croyer and Brad Bird. A few people have heard of Brad Bird, maybe, and there was Dan Haskett and anyway, Chuck Harvey. So we had a few people from Disney and worked on this whole Animal Olympics thing, and basically the Olympics got canceled because Russia invaded Afghanistan, and Carter said, forget it, we're not coming. And we went, oh, we have a movie. It's my first movie.
That's rejection again.
Experience. I got to, myself and John Norton, who people will know as a story artist on films. He and I did all the character design work and a lot of the animation and all the storyboarding, and it was fun. So that was, I just came up through the trenches, and working for you was after I already worked in Canada for Rock and Roll up in Nelvana, and in Tokyo for Little Nemo in Slumberland. So it was after that I finally came to the studio, Dave Steffen said, they're looking for people. And I came in and met with you and George. Is this too long a story? I should edit.
No, we're you know, it's fine. We have editors standing by.
What is this, the Roger Allers life story?
No, it's interesting. It's interesting. We're totally there. It's fine.
Anyway, I interviewed with you. What's strange, Don, is that we just bypassed everything. You know,
we did.
I had no review board. There was no filters. I just came in, met with you and George. You went, again, I didn't have any portfolio because it was still in Japan. And you guys said, do some drawings. Here are the characters. So I did those and brought them back. And you guys said, yeah.
And they were really good. They were really good. I think hearing you talk, I think of how many different films we've worked on that are not Disney films. And it might surprise the people listening in that all of us have worked on things that didn't necessarily go through the Renaissance. You know, I think of Iron Giant, and I think of the Chipmunks movie, and Brave Little Toaster, Kirk, I think you worked on. Animal Olympics we talked about. So there was a lot of that going on. Really? Oh, okay. Hello.
I had relating to the Brave Little Toaster, I had a great experience with you, Don. I don't know if you remember, but Jerry had asked me to do some work on the character design, and it meant actually leaving Disney because I had a job there and things were a little slow. I think we were between projects or something. It was a little bit of a weird moment of, you know, non-production, but I went to you and I was like, Don, I'm really torn about this because my dream was to work at Disney. And now here I am asking to leave. And you know what you said, Don? You said, Rob, it's okay. You can leave. And as soon as you're ready, you can come back. And I was like, really?
I had been drinking at the time. Yeah.
But I'll tell you, it really, you know, it made a huge difference. And you were good. You were good at your word. I worked for 6 months or so on the project, and then when they all went to Taiwan to make the movie, I called you up, and you're like, "All right, here's your old office."
It's a great movie too. I love that movie. John Musker, I wanted to ask you how you kind of came into it all, and I also want to kind of get into the studio and especially Eric Larson and kind of what he brought to you all, because he was, for many of you, kind of a common thread.
Yeah, I mean, there's this kind of two-pronged thing. There was CalArts, but there was the in-house training program that Ron came through and I came through, and that Eric Larson, who's one of the 9 old men, was really the mentor for a whole generation of animators, Glenn Keane and Lorna and everybody that went through there. And he was so avuncular, so gentle, so patient. So I feel like there's a whole generation that owes their chops to Eric Larson. But yeah, I came through CalArts. So I again, rejection. I'll try and do a shorter version of Roger's story, but I was I was, you know, I read the Art of Walt Disney book, Christopher Finch. They said Disney had a training program. I had gotten out of college. I had majored in English because I thought all art was self-taught anyway. And so I was trying to read the great books, you know, being an English major. Anyway, then I heard about this training program, sent a portfolio to Disney, and I got rejected by Disney, and they didn't like my work. And then a few weeks later, they said, well, maybe you meant to send this to CalArts. And I had never heard of CalArts, and I didn't know anything about it. And so I wrote to them. So I sent them the portfolio, and I went to CalArts never having even visited the school. I had no, you know, it was a different era then. So I came out to California. Here it is, cinder blocks and people, and where am I? And there's a deli at the bottom of the hill, and there's a vast expanse of onion fields and scruffy oak trees. And this is where I'm at. So anyway, I wound up going there 2 years, and Disney actually came and saw the student work. I was part of the first year's character animation class. John Laster, Brad Bird, Daryl Van Sitters, me, Nancy Beeman, Joanne Cicero, Jerry Reese. We were all in that class.
Wow.
And Tim Burton was a year behind us, and Chris Buck and Mike Giamo and those guys, Larry White. Anyway, so Disney, the review board came to the studio. They liked my test, and they invited me to come work there. So I wound up there 2 years later, and I was part of the first farm team. So from CalArts, it was me, Brad, Henry Selick, Jerry Reese, Doug Leffler, and I think, am I forgetting one other person? I might be, but so we were the first wave from CalArts that came to Disney. And then I got put into the training program with Eric Larson, and I felt like that was so amazing. You know, I'd worked for a summer before that as an intern with Eric, but I love Eric. We've all got our Eric stories probably. And Ron worked with Eric, and I don't know, Ron, if you want to talk about Eric a little bit, but amazing.
Yeah, I think that's the one probably consistent thing, at least for a big generation, is everybody. When you first started at the studio, you worked with Eric. I mean, the training program started as Lorna sort of mentioned, it was like a 4-week trial period. When you were brought in, it was like you were actually hired, you were kind of paid a very small salary. You could animate anything you wanted within 4 weeks, working with Eric, and he would sort of tutor you. And then at the end of the 4 weeks, the review board would look at your test and then decide if you want to go another 4 weeks. And if you made it through the 8 weeks, you know, then you were kind of hired to be there. It's interesting, I did mention that I took an Art Babbitt class when I came to California from Sioux City. And at the same time, I started working at the studio. And it really struck me how different their two approaches were, because Art's class that he taught then, and this was the state of animation at that time, it was kind of like, this is how you do a walk, this is how you do a run, this is how you do a take, this is how you do a play. I mean, it was very formulaic. Everything was just like, not a lot of creativity. But Eric, on the other hand, taught it completely different. It was like getting into the head of the character and kind of understanding what their personality was and what they were thinking, what they were feeling, and sort of expressing kind of yourself through that. And it was much more inspiring, much more fun. Eric always, and he had a very specific way of drawing that was kind of scratchy. It surprised people, I think, when they first worked with him, because you think of the Disney sort of beautiful, refined drawings, but Eric's drawing wasn't like that, but it was full of life and personality. And yeah, I think certainly in terms of the Disney Renaissance, Eric has to be considered one of the key people that kind of set up a new generation at Disney.
Yeah, when we're kind of getting into that kind of so-called Renaissance period now, with films like Great Mouse Detective and Oliver and Company and Roger Rabbit. And I think those films were kind of a transitional time. For me personally, Great Mouse Detective, or Basil of Baker Street, as we used to call it, was the transition, because I worked too many years of my life on The Black Cauldron, which has some great work in it, but didn't quite fire off as a movie. And there was a real divide in the studio. I remember working for Art Stevens and some of the directors upstairs and looking downstairs into rooms full of, you know, Brad Bird and Henry Selick, and feeling like everybody was on drugs downstairs and there was just no connection between the two groups. So there was a real kind of push of incredible energy and, you know, in the ranks from all these new people from the outside, from Cal Arts, from Sioux City. And, you know, that energy was starting to show up, for me anyway, in Mouse Detective. How do you guys feel about that?
Well, I think it was a transitional film. I mean, basically Ron pitched the idea. We were in trouble on Cauldron. I was briefly a director on Black Cauldron because they were trying to get a younger voice in the room of some of the veteran people who had done Fox and the Hound. So Tom Wilhite, who was a marketing executive who'd been sort of drafted by Ron Miller to be his Irving Thalberg and kind of reinvent Disney a little bit and bring in, he's the one who brought in Steve Lisberger. He saw Tron, you know, in the script form and said, this is something where we could expand, you know, we don't have to do Gus the Kicking Mule every, you know, whatever, every summer, and the computer wore tennis shoes or whatever. I mean, Ron Miller's taste tended to be down those lines, and because they were successful, and he's like, that's what we do, we keep doing that. And that was kind of atrophying. So really it was where was I going on? Anyway, Tom basically said, here, you get thrown in the mix with these other people who didn't want me there. So I spent, you know, a year trying to, you know, Tim Burton had done designs. I'm like, hey, aren't these great designs that Tim Burton did? And they were like, these aren't Disney. What are you talking about? And your storyboards are a total waste of time. And why am I even looking at these? So it was not a very happy time for me. And then Ron, in the meantime, was also getting in trouble with them for liking the original book. What's wrong with you? You like the book? And so we were both sort of on thin ice. And Ron pitched sort of Basil of Baker Street as a possible project to Joe Hale. Ron, you want to?
Well, just briefly, Joe was saying that Ron Miller was looking for new ideas for films. I'm a big Sherlock Holmes buff. I had made a 15-minute film about Sherlock Holmes when I was in high school, and I always thought that would be cool to do something with Disney. And then while we were working on The Rescuers, I discovered these books, the Basil Baker Street books by Eve Titus. And I thought, that's a way of doing that Sherlock Holmes Victorian atmosphere, but still doing it in animation. And, but we were doing Rescuers, which was also Mouse Detectives. So I thought, this is not the right time. But when Joe brought it up, that we're looking for ideas, I mentioned it, and Joe sort of clicked to it. And I did not pitch it to Ron Miller. Joe pitched it to Ron Miller. I think he had Don Griffith, who was the layout artist, do a piece, and Ron responded to it and wanted to put it in development and production. And this was a few years before, I would say, the big transition where Disney changed completely, which was where the whole studio was almost bought by a corporate raider, Saul Steinberg. It could have been sort of demolished at that time, but it didn't happen. But we worked on the story, John and I, and Rob Minkoff worked on it too.
Well, and animated, and Rob wants to get
later animated on it.
Yeah, Rob, you had
the story that I think is actually very relevant to this conversation. This actually touches on 1982 when nobody got hired. I got accepted into a month internship working with Eric Larson and Dan Jupe and Glenn Kroll, one other student. And it was during the strike, the animation strike. And so nobody was in the building except me and Dan and Glenn. And so we got to sneak into everybody's offices and see all the amazing stuff going on. We saw Tim Burton's designs for Black Cauldron, which we were like, oh my God, these are amazing. We also saw all the early storyboards on Great Mouse Detective or Basil Baker Street, and it was very different. It was there was a real sensibility shift. What it was very Monty Python.
Yeah, that was my original version of it. That I was pushing the Goon shows, Monty Python, all this. And
And one other memory I wanted to touch on was there was a drawing on Joe Ramp's door of a Ron Miller looking like Frankenstein with a blue face that said, "Where's the goddamn warmth?" And I was like, what is that about? He goes, well, there was a meeting with Ron where we were pitching all of this Basil and Baker Street stuff in the John Cleese Monty Python kind of sensibility, and it didn't go well.
No, it didn't go well.
Oh, man.
Yeah, Ron just was like,
start over. Two versions of Basil and Baker Street.
Yeah, right. Yes, the original version was that version that you saw. Then we were trying to push it in that direction. Ron did not respond to that. He really was like, kind of, where's the warmth, and start over. And so. So at that point, I sort of backed off my approach, and Vance and Pete helped kind of steer it a little bit differently, and then Bernie Mattinson came on. Bernie Mattinson came on, and it ultimately became, we were co-directors, and then once the big shift with Jeffrey came, Bernie was made the producer, and I was one of the directors, along with ultimately Ron.
Yeah, it was a happy time. It's like a relief, I think, for everybody that was in the studio at that time. It's like a breath of fresh air.
But I do think, although we were, I was going to say, I think Basil was one of the opportunities where some of the young voices, which had been sort of excluded, got to speak, and Glenn Keane and Matt Callahan, various people, myself included, and Ron. I mean, where you were making creative decisions that were not being sort of hampered by management so much, and I think that's part of the opening of the flower, as Rob was alluding to, that there was some.
Yeah. The other thing, if people remember, is we were thrown out of the animation building, and we were in this sort of very rinky-dink warehouse in Glendale, which seemed very depressing, but at the same time, I think it helped kind of create a certain unity that hadn't been there before.
I wanted to, you guys, like Ron and John, you were and still are brilliant animators and draftsmen. Rob, Lorna, for sure. All of you are amazing drafts people. But all of you storyboard also, and that's some might think a different skill, but it's I know Glenn Keane storyboards well. And who did you look at in the studio, past or present, as your mentor, living or dead, for story art? I mean, Brenda, Gary, who was it? Vance Gary? Was it Bill Pete? Or like, who was your hero?
Bill Pete, Joe Rinaldi.
And Vance, definitely Vance.
When we got to the studio, it was Vance, Roger, and Joe Ramp.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it was Vance. Roger was my guru. he was my go-to, and Joe. Yeah, I mean, but also Gary. I mean, you know, there were just so many, and Ed Gombert. I just felt like I came into like a richness of mentors and people that I just would like take copies of their drawings and hang them up, and I just it was an incredible time for me.
Yeah. Chris Sanders at the same time.
Yeah.
Gary, you're one of the people I use as an example when I talk to students about being yourself and drawing like yourself. You and Tim Burton actually are the two people I talk about, because you have, and I mean this as a compliment, an unconventional way of drawing, but it's funny as hell and it communicates really well. And the way you approach storyboarding is really individual. Did you ever feel like pressure to turn into a, you know, more of a Disney style? Because your background was special effects before you went into story.
Yeah, I'm one of the few people that did not have an Eric Larson experience, because I came through effects and went from effects to story. So it was like kind of a detour around the character animation. So I didn't really learn I didn't really come up drawing characters, and it's like a point of dubious pride for me that I have never drawn on model in my entire career.
Congratulations.
So,
yeah, you should see some of
and this is something
I
got from Joe Rampt, is like, it doesn't matter, you know, you get him in like kind of the right shape and the right colors, and people know who it is. It's the story that matters. It's the idea that matters, not the drawing. So, I mean, you were talking about gurus and influences. Vance was one of my early mentors. Floyd Norman before that.
Oh yeah. Oh my God.
And I spent a lot of time, you know, like being influenced by Sergio Aragonés of Mad Magazine. His cartooning
I think
style
we all were Mad Magazine fans. Yeah.
Big influence.
And Don Martin, I feel like there's some Don Martin in you there, Gary. I don't know.
Yeah, there might be.
Just a little.
Just the anvil parts.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention that is interesting, I think, and in terms of everybody doing storyboarding, is that, like, when I started, the emphasis was so much on animation. I mean, the review board was pretty much all animators, and the tests were animation, and they were really, really focused on trying to find animators. They weren't really so focused in trying to find really good story artists. And I think one thing that transformed the studio was, as with this group here would attest to, is an influx of really good story artists, which had been lacking, I think, in the earlier films. And that's part of the reason the stories themselves, I think, maybe might have been lacking a bit.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I started, I think, later than all of you guys. I mean, I got hired in '87 and was at CalArts earlier. And my goal when I got to CalArts was to become an animator, but then that opened up, and I still remember it was that final test that I did that you saw that got me hired at Disney, but that Joe Rampt came by. He was teaching at CalArts at the time. He wasn't my teacher, but he was teaching the freshmen, and he saw my boards on the wall and said, "Do you ever think of getting into story?" That had never been brought up by any of my teachers or anybody else, and I realized it was like this light bulb went off. It's like, I loved that part of it. And here I am animating and going through, to me, which was incredibly tedious, but it was like, God damn, I was going to do it, you know? But it was like, I could do this? Really? You know? So that was a revelation. But yeah, all the teachers were like saying, no, you have to go in as a cleanup artist and then work your way up to be an animator.
Yeah.
And, you know.
I was a supervising animator. I was a supervising animator on The Fox and the Hound, and I had enjoyed animating, but I was starting to kind of feel like I was getting interested in story. And I loved the Black Cauldron books, as John said, and so I really wanted to get on early on Black Cauldron, and it was a struggle. It was like, no, we want you to keep animating, and that was like the feeling, like.
Well, there was no in-house program for developing story artists, really.
No, not at all.
So it was more happenstance, or somebody like Roger who got pulled in, which was great, that, you know, through this back door or whatever, you know, and short-circuited the whole process, which was
You know,
good.
it's interesting because I think back in, after Walt's death in the late 60s, the 70s and the early 80s, to me, it felt like there was no sense of story going on. It all felt now like the story was being dictated by animators who wanted to do their bits. And the movies just felt like collections of animation bits.
They were.
And not stories.
Yeah.
And it just really, it seemed like this sounds like bragging, and it is, okay. But I think it was our time that really started concentrating on story.
I can attest to that.
We had all these great people. We all just came together at a really, I mean, this was kind of an amazing time. I am so grateful that I was there at that time,
Me too.
I dreamt always as a small child of going and being an animator at Disney.
Yeah.
And when I finally got there, it was like, oh, well, Walt's gone. They're off the lot. We're in a warehouse, and it's all different ball game. And I just told myself, well, all right, you're at Disney, but it's going to be whatever it is. It's not what I thought it was as a child,
Just have to.
But who knew it was going to be just like
exactly.
We all dove in. We all wanted to make movies, good movies.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted it to do such a good job.
That's crazy talk.
That energy. What's that?
I just said that's crazy talk. It's just good movies. Lorna, you were going to say something.
Listening to Brenda, I have to say, first of all, it was Brenda who really illuminated, my mind as far as when I started boarding on The Lion King. And up until then, I'd been an animator for many years and loved it. But there came a time where it just felt like there's got to be a bigger field of vision to explore. And I did some of that when I was working with Don Bluth. I did some boarding, but coming on to The Lion King, as an animator, you've got this kind of mentality. I've been using a pencil, for how many years, and she knows this. I've said it to her many times, but she handed me a China marker and said, use this. And I went, okay, what the hell? And it just was like freedom, because you could get such wonderful contrast, and it just felt so visceral to draw and everything else. And I have to say, I never looked back. I was very scared to become a story artist for some reason, like how do you switch gears? But it was, the best step. And I do think we're seeing tremendous talent more and more. And you're right, there wasn't a program for storyboarding.
The interesting thing about, what Brenda was saying is that when she was at Cal Arts, everybody was pushing and pushing and pushing her to be an animator. But I've always thought, looking back on it, was that ironically, the whole thing was about making a film.
Yeah.
The whole thing was geared towards, I got to come up with an idea. I got to storyboard it. I got to record the actors. I got to design the characters. I got to animate it. I got to edit it. I got to do everything. But it was all about how good was your film and how big an impact did the story have. So I think all the people, especially people that went through the Cal Arts program, not everybody did, but especially, had that like charge of, the thing is the film. It's not just the animation. In fact, that was an early concept that I remember people saying, good animation can't save a bad story. And bad animation is, if it's a good story.
Yeah.
Can't kill a good story, yeah.
Well, a good example of that to me, maybe that I know many people love Robin Hood, and I know many people were sort of inspired by it, but that was the film that had just been finished when I started, and it just seemed like it was incredible animation and a kind of mixed up story where things just, it was kind of episodic. This happened, that happened, it finally ended. It just wasn't that sense of really trying to really tell a strong story.
Yeah, but that goes back to what I think Roger was saying about the animators were storyboarding at the time. So it was quite often a film of close-up acting scenes, so you could really kind of show off your animation. I wanted to leap ahead a little bit into the late 80s. Roger Rabbit had come out. Dick Williams directed it in London, and it was a big success. But then Mermaid was really, I think, the opening of the Renaissance, if you want to use that as a term. And you guys in the late 80s were in trailers on Flower Street in Glendale, California, with Howard Ashman. And let's talk a little bit about Alan Menken Howard Ashman, Mermaid, and kind of what those times were like and what Howard and Alan brought into the studio.
Well, Ron had really pitched Little Mermaid at a gong show. Jeffrey and Michael brought this whole idea of, here, pitch us some ideas, and Ron pitched.
And it was rejected, wasn't it?
And it was rejected initially, yes.
I mean, the gong show, just real quickly, it was Michael and Jeffrey. They were new at Disney. We didn't know them very well. Michael had this idea of brainstorming that I think came from Paramount and ABC, where it's like he gathered a group of us together, a group of directors and story artists, and this was while we were kind of in the early stages of Great Mouse Detective. He said, I want everybody to come up with 5 ideas for new animated films, and then come back in 2 weeks and then pitch them. And we call it the Gong Show because it's like we don't want to spend a lot of time wasted just on ideas we don't like. So it's going to basically be yes or no. And then when we came back, and I found The Little Mermaid, I read it in a bookstore, I've talked about it before, and I got excited about it, except then I got to the end of it and it seemed like one of the saddest stories ever written. I started to play with it, and I came up with a 2-page treatment where the witch was more of a villain, the father was sort of anti-human, and it had a happy ending, which Anderson's story did not. And I wrote it up, and I was very excited about it. When it got to me at the Gong Show, and it was just pitch your best idea, and I said The Little Mermaid, and it was gonged at that Gong Show. And I was really disappointed about it because I thought there was a lot of potential in it. But about 2 days later, Jeffrey Katzenberg called me, and I actually had written 5 2-page treatments. I had 5 ideas, which is what they had originally asked for. And he went through all 5 and said, this, maybe this could work for TV. We don't like this for this reason or that. But Michael and I both like The Little Mermaid. We think it has potential. We want to put it in development. And that's kind of how the whole thing started. And that was before the bulk of production on Great Mouse Detective was done.
Wow.
John and I and Bernie Mattinson and Dave Misher were directing Great Mouse Detective. While Little Mermaid, I was spending a little time on that.
And independently of all that, the studio, Jeffrey was wooing Howard Ashman, who had done Little Shop of Horrors and was interested in animation a bit. And they threw a whole bunch of ideas that were in development at Howard in an attempt to woo him. And Little Mermaid was on that list. And Howard just picked that out of the list and said,
Yeah.
well, I like Anderson. I'd like to work on that. And so they paired us up with Howard. Then we loved Little Shop of Horrors, but we had never met Howard. We spoke, and Peter said, oh, it's going to be great. You guys should go back to New York. And Howard's already got these great ideas. He read the basic pitch, and he wants to make the crab a Rastafarian. Go talk to Howard. It's going to be, wait, the Rastafarian part. Well, yeah, so then we talked to Howard on the phone. I spoke with him on the phone, and he said, now, are you guys thinking this is like set in Denmark? And we said, well, it's a very loose sort of fairy tale-y world. It could, it's just Denmark, and it's a fairy tale world. He said, because I've got this idea. I want to, work in reggae and calypso music because I feel it would contemporize it more, and it fits with the seaside motif of it. And we said, go for it. I mean, really, that can work. We think it can work, but we weren't exactly sure because we thought, how's this crab? This crab is going to be this laid back Jamaican who, and we had this fuss budget character. How will that tie together? And then Howard said, no, I'm thinking like Jeffrey Holder in the Uncle Course. I'm very grand and very big and all that. And like, okay, Jamaican and big and grand.
Yeah.
Shortly before this, the studio, the interesting thing is that scripts were unusual at Disney at that time. And I don't even think under Walt there were a lot of scripts, actual screenplays written.
Yes.
But Michael was adamant, like, I'm not going to prove anything without a script. And originally a great Pulitzer Prize winning and a filmmaker, he wrote The Witches of Eastwick, Michael Christopher was going to write The Little Mermaid. And he actually pulled out because he thought his take would be too dark. And when we met with him a little bit, before this, I had asked John, well, it's sort of around this time, I think, after Michael Christopher pulled out, said his take was too dark. I knew John really well. We had both gone through horrible experiences together on the Black Cauldron. And I knew John was a really good writer. And I asked him if he wanted to sort of collaborate on a script. He said yes. And then I pitched that to Peter Schneider, who was our boss. And Peter greatly said, yeah, go ahead, write it. But before he wrote the script, we went to New York. We met with Howard for the first time. We talked over the story and the songs. And in a 2-day meeting in New York, the essential songs of Little Mermaid were kind of, at the end of that 2 days, they were kind of there, almost all the songs, which is really rare. Nothing like that has ever happened again. John and I went back and wrote the script. Howard.
Although, wait, let me just interject one thing with that. Howard, when we had lunch with him that last day in New York, he basically kind of said, "You guys don't need me. Just go ahead. Just do you don't need me. It's really, you guys are
False
doing
humility,
fine."
yes.
Yeah. Now, whether or not that was Howard's, come on, get me, manipulative thing, or he was sincere, I don't know. But we said, no, we like ideas. We want to collaborate with you, and we were very sincere in that. And so he said, "Oh,
and actually,
came to California."
Alan Menken joined Howard. He wasn't with Howard originally, but at a certain point, Howard brought Alan Menken on, and they both. That we talked about. Gary Trousdale, I know, was there, and Kelly Asbury, I think Gary and Kelly were in a room doing storyboarding development ideas on Under the Sea, and Howard and Alan were in the room right next to them writing the songs.
Yeah, which was magical because I remember walking down those hallways and you would just hear the music pouring out from underneath the doorway somewhere. And it felt like nothing I had ever experienced before.
Well, it was a throwback to the 30s.
Before Howard and Alan were in that room, it was the Sherman Brothers, and they were writing.
The music room.
They were writing, I think,
Connecticut
Connecticut Yankee or something like that.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
you're just like
Connecticut Doggy or
balls.
something.
And then when Howard and
It
Alan
was.
got in there, it's like, I like this.
They were developing the
They-
Connecticut
Yeah,
Yorkie.
Little Mermaid trailer.
Connecticut
Yeah.
Yorkie.
You would hear the hook from Under the Sea. Da 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 1,000 times.
1,000 times.
And walk by and it's like, there it is again, there it is.
It brought an energy to that place. I mean, it
Absolutely.
really did. It was, for those of us who were like toiling away, I think I think it was like the tail end of Oliver and Company to hear that, sort of coming in from under the door and to sneak into like Ron's office and see all the rough character designs. It was electrifying. I was like, when I first started to hear that music in the hallway and see some of the design work that was being done just on a concept level, I was like, well, this is why I'm here. These are the kinds of movies I want to make.
Yeah.
Like, this is what we should be doing. And there was just an excitement. I felt like a fuse had been lit.
Yeah, it's so true. And that carried on into Beauty and the Beast too, because many of us had the experience of going to beautiful Poughkeepsie and Fishkill, New York, which is up the Hudson River, to work at the Residence Inn in Fishkill with Howard and Alan. At the time, Howard was sick and we didn't quite realize why. But anyway, we happily went up to upstate New York to work with him on Beauty and the Beast. The one thing I always remember about Howard is how fearless he was about changing stories. He was like the king of adapting things, and that's what Walt Disney was, I suppose. And what all of you folks ended up doing was, like, you told your own story. You weren't slavishly welded to Hans Christian Andersen or whatever. So those early Beauty and the Beast days with Howard and Alan, can you talk a little bit about that, Kirk? Gary, Roger, you were there, Brenda?
Ready to go.
Yeah.
And begin. Okay, that's enough.
It was for me, it was inspiring. I mean, having first met Howard on Mermaid in the trailer as a story trainee, I was just kind of wide-eyed and in awe of him and his fire. It was a little scary at times, but boy, he could really deliver. And then going to Fishkill and seeing his fire, Kirk can attest to that. But he just he had a passion for it that was contagious, and so being in a room and it just sort of this electric thing that would happen when you're sitting in there talking about things and the back and forth and then oh yeah, and it was just never had anything like it since. It's been amazing.
It really was intensely creative. I mean, and Howard could be super opinionated. It's like,
oh yeah,
you wanted to get your opinion over his opinion. You had to work pretty hard on that one. I mean, it didn't always work. I mean, wow.
It was so satisfying when it did. When he did like an idea, it's like
I remember in one session I said, "Oh, this because he and Alan would demonstrate the music, and they were doing the end of the bell number. Remember that? You know,
Yeah.
You know, and I was going, and they said, "What do you think?" And I went, "Well, I think it needs a little more to feel like it's denser. The crowd is on top of each other. You need another part." And he said, "Okay, we'll play it again, and you sing it. Make it up." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then I just made up some stuff, and then they used it.
That's like, that's right. I think you Roger, I think you were the one who pitched like those little like crowd asides and like
Yeah.
Get them, Michael.
Yeah, all that silliness. That's right.
Yeah.
Gosh.
But it's like, you know, you get put on the spot and you're going to have to deliver. I mean, that was great about Howard, though. I mean, he was so challenging.
He was opinionated, but he would listen.
Yeah.
The thing that Howard shared, the thing that was amazing about Howard, and why I feel it was just, you know, fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it, that brought all of us together, was that despite the fact that Howard came from, you know, the outside, he had just a affinity and a love for this medium that you know, like Brenda has said, that I haven't encountered before or since, you know, from anyone who didn't you know, come up through the ranks in animation.
Well, even his musical taste, it wasn't just Broadway, which is, you know, was kind of common when you get you're doing musical theater, you get a lot of Broadway writers, and Howard liked a lot of like Jamaican music, for instance, and I mean, he liked rock. He was all over the map with music, and you know, it showed in his wit and his versatility.
Absolutely.
And one thing, just that Howard, I know at the time, even on Mermaid, was a little depressed about the state of musical theater and musical and even movie musicals, everything in general. It seemed like things were not what they were. And he was excited that animation seemed like it was an opportunity to really bring some of that back and do some really, really great musicals. And ironic, I mean, the cool thing is that I think musicals are much more popular now than they were at the time that Howard was sort of getting involved. And if he had seen the future, that he could have seen that he was such an influence. I know Lin-Manuel Miranda was a huge Howard Ashman, Alan Menken fan. He named his first son Sebastian, and just the influence that he had, and I wish he could have seen.
Howard had told us that he felt that musical theater, once it, you know, he loved classic musicals, but by the time of the 60s and that, he felt like the songs that were in musicals that used to be the hits, you know, that were in effect the top 40 of the time, it was no longer that way. Theater songs weren't crossing over to the mainstream. So he felt like it was becoming this rarefied and kind of insular form that didn't tap into the popular culture in a way. So his version, even like putting calypso and reggae into Mermaid, was, I want to contemporize this music. I'm not, you know, he wasn't trying to pay homage to some classical musical theater thing. He really was like, just, it's infectious. Like Gary said, he liked Jamaican music and he just responds to that, you know, and wasn't trying to fit it into a Broadway thing. Ironically, everybody's like, Howard,
but he understood the musical structure. He understood the musical structure, how to use songs. The few musicals that were done at the time, and there were a lot of bad musicals that were a few film musicals, and always the definition of a bad musical is they cut out the songs. It's the first thing they cut out because the film is too long. And Howard's approach was writing songs you couldn't possibly cut out because the essence of the movie was in the songs, and that. So he really just knew how to use music to tell a story.
I thought it was fascinating because he delivered a little lecture on how similar the structure and intent of Broadway musicals and animated films were. That they both, the comparison of the two, which was so interesting because I grew up loving both those forms, you know, and then it was all of a sudden it was like, oh, they're really alike, aren't they? Because they both simplify.
Yeah.
All the characters are simplified, and symbols become really condensed. You know, scenes symbolize things. Everything becomes very condensed, and in its condensation, it has to tell a lot and move you to the next place. You know, it's not like these expansive, slow movies. But I thought it was so interesting that animated films, that he saw that, how the two the two forms were so related, and that was really eye-opening.
Well, and the other thing that Howard was proud of, even like in Little Shop, was the economy that he used, so that, you know,
Yes.
you really tried to do a lot, and every moment was made to advance something, and it never sort of was static or stationary, and no wasted words or songs or lyrics or whatever.
And like you said, he was fearless about mashing up different styles. So to take a kind of Danish fairy tale and say, well, that belongs with all this Caribbean Rastafarian stuff, or Little Shop was like, well, let's do girl group rock and roll with this monster TV. You know, it was kind of amazing. And he did the same on Aladdin. I mean, I remember hearing his original Aladdin tape. Right. And his idea for that was insane, and yet it's, you know, pretty brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, he was really going for, you know, Fats Waller and a Hope Crosby lark, you know, a romp in this sort of Hollywood Arabia. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't meant to be a documentary. It was very fanciful and Hollywoody and campy and all those things. And that was Howard's take on. And then Jeffrey got totally alienated. He didn't really want to do that. And then we sort of resurrected it when we came on board. We said, no, we like that with some changes. We made some changes, but we liked Howard's basic take on it.
Yeah, Howard and Alan had written their original score of Aladdin and I think like a 30-page or 45-page treatment while Mermaid was going on.
Yeah.
And before Beauty and the Beast, actually. It was Howard's idea to do Aladdin to begin with. And we heard the score. John and I weren't involved at all, but we heard the score and we really liked the music. I think even Howard might have directed Aladdin if things had gone differently, but Jeffrey did not like Howard's take. And like I said, that was before we were involved. And at the same time, he wanted Howard to go on to Beauty and the Beast. So it worked out kind of good. But
yes, yeah, we were happy that it crashed and burned. We musically, we ran into a really, for me anyway, a difficult transition going on to Lion King, because we were spoiled, I think, by Howard and Alan. Yeah. Tim Rice was in the studio. They were working on Evita at the time as a live action movie. And Tim was really attracted to animation. He filled in on Aladdin for, sadly, when Howard passed away, and wrote an Oscar-winning song in A Whole New World. And then on Lion King, we were, I know, Roger, you were listening to Ladysmith Black Mambazo and great kind of South African indigenous music. And Tim was certainly aware of that, but he suggested Elton John. Actually, first he suggested ABBA to come in and do the music on Lion King, because he had just worked with them on Chess. Can you Brenda, Lorna, Rob, talk about that transition, because it was a whole new world going in with Elton, who had never written a musical before, and Tim, who was pretty masterful, and working with them on that early days of Lion King.
It's interesting. This is sort of from the latter part of the production, but when we actually took the film to show to Elton, we learned that his whole reason for doing this was because he always wanted to be able to write a love song for a Disney movie.
Which we had cut out.
Of the love songs for Disney movies. And of course, in that screening, we had been sort of feeling like, it doesn't feel integrated. So we made a very sarcastic version of it. He hated it. And he was right. He was right to push us back towards really making it romantic. But I thought it was interesting that was something in him. He loved the Disney movies and the love songs from it. So he was passionate about it, but it was kind of like a ball from into the left field. It was like, oh, okay, these guys are doing it. It's, it's not King Sunny Ade or, Youssou N'Dour, it's Elton John. Right. And well, obviously the addition of Hans and Lebo, bringing in the African taste and rhythms and voices, that integrated the whole thing. And so the popular structure of the songs, and they were very catchy, and then you had Hans's brilliant work of integrating them. So it did become part of the fabric of.
I still remember hearing Circle of Life the first time when Elton had done it, and it was like, it felt like a Las Vegas kind of thing, It's on the piano, and it was just like, oh my God, how is this African? How are we going to do this? Oh my Lord!
But but there was two different versions. That was the first version.
There was one that went, and we'll all join in the circle of life.
It was horrible.
Didn't go with that one.
But I was just like, oh, no, what do we do? And then I remember being invited to go to Hans when he was just starting out, and I got there a little late, just like today, and came in, and this incredible music was playing. Like, yeah, this is the feel. And I thought it was just sample music he was doing, you know, whatever. And then I remember standing next to Rob and looking at him and realizing I heard the tune that Elton had done, and I just remember literally feeling like I wanted to drop to the floor and kiss Hans's feet, you know. It was just,
which we did later, yeah.
Yeah, but then we were actually, I also remember we were all acting out the boards, you know, and what we could do, because the music was inspiring. And I can still remember Rob going, boom, you know, at the end, and it was incredible. You know, and it's a beautiful song, and you know, that collaboration was magical.
With Hans Zimmer, it put the soul into the film. And then when you're working with that music, you're drawing to it, you're animating to it, you know deep in your bones that something very special is taking place. And that was, you know, those moments you don't get many of, but
no.
Yeah.
Wonderful. The funniest thing about the Circle of Life is, which I never knew at the time, is Hans said he was writing it and arranging it and running out of time because Rob and Roger were due at his studio, and they were about 15 minutes away, and he just thought, I can't finish this, so I'm just going to put a big boom on the end of it, and then we'll come back and revisit it. We got this huge bass drum thing and put it on the end, and then we listened to it and thought, that's spectacular. That boom is so interesting. That's fantastic. We'll put the title there. But he was just out of time. He had no time. It's like,
and we kept saying, make it bigger, a bigger boom, a bigger boom. Is that big enough?
That story. Roger and I actually were with Hans, and he was sitting at the keyboard, and we were talking about what to do. And I think Roger and I said, maybe it should have a thing, and we could put the title, right? Yeah. We could put the title of the movie right there. And then I think he did play it once. We're like, bigger.
Always bigger. Well, it's the same thing happened with Lebo. Lebo was parking cars for a valet parking guy, and Lebo is the amazing Cry in the Wilderness at the beginning of the show. And Hans had lost track of him. He had worked with Hans before, and he came into the studio just in time, within a few days of us working there. And Rob and Roger said, we need this kind of Cry in the Wilderness. And we weren't even in a recording booth. I think he was just standing in the room with the Chinese lunch and tried a couple of things, which ended up being this kind of iconic voice that everybody mimics. So yeah, the humble beginnings, I think, is the theme of that you just never know when those ideas are going to come from.
Well, when Hans was suggested by Chris Montan, we were like, who's that? And they said, well, he wrote this great score to a movie called The Power of One. And so we got the CD and we started to listen to it. And the first thing that they have in that movie is Lebo going, la, do this thing. We're like, wow. And then we're like, can we do that too?
And we did.
I remember meeting with Hans, and the very first meeting I think we had with him in London. And one of the first things he said was, I really want to use a lot of voice. I want to use voice as one of the instruments. And he really did follow through with that. And Lebo, of course, did all the lyrics, you know, the Zulu and other, I can't remember the other name of the other language, the other South African language. But that, yeah, made such a huge difference.
It really is. One thing I wanted to point out is how much each of you helped each other on your movies. I mean, I remember Kirk and Gary going up to Northern California to help on Toy Story and come up with gags for that. All of you worked on each other's movies, I'm sure, and that was part of the culture and part of what made those movies great. And that kind of lack of ego and willingness to kind of help each other out was so special at the time. And I think some studios miss that. They feel like it's very compartmentalized and kind of silos of this movie and this television thing. But there was such an amazing kind of exchange of ideas where you could grab somebody and bring them in. You know, I remember Rob doing character designs on Little Mermaid, and you know, there's just so many different contributions you all made.
Very importantly, you know, there was on many of these movies, not all, but some, there was like an early version, an early development where it got to a point and Jeffrey or Peter or whoever would say, this is not working. And we had that on Lion King, which is sort of when I got involved. And we said, well, what are we gonna do that? Or are we gonna do something, can we change it? And I remember Don was like, no, we can change it. And so Roger and Brenda, Kirk, Gary, myself, and Don basically got into a room for 2 days and said, what are we gonna do?
Yeah.
And we said, let's make it more epic and more kind of religious, like Joseph. And Simba has to become an outcast and be sent into the desert like Moses, and We were talking about all this stuff. And I think Kirk actually offered in that first 2 days, the remember who you are line that became Mufasa's sort of big moment. And even the idea that Mufasa would come back as a ghost to talk to Simba and to give him this sort of new perspective, that all happened in 2 days. And then we went to pitch it to Michael Eisner, Jeffrey, and Peter, Tom, and everybody else. And there's a giant room of people. And at the end of the pitch, Michael Eisner said, this isn't based on anything. And we're like, yeah, well, I guess it's an original story. He goes, well, maybe it's Shakespearean. Could it be King Lear? And we were like, King Lear? Like, I know there's a king in the title, but King Lear, like that's about an old guy with 3 daughters and 2 are villains. And then Maureen Donnelly, who produced The Little Mermaid, chimed in from the back of the room. She said, no, it's Hamlet. And everyone went, Hamlet, of course, Hamlet. The uncle kills the king, who's the father, and then the son has to decide what to do. Will he take action? And then Michael said, all right, we're making Hamlet with lions.
That was so important. I mean, that's when he locked in.
Yeah.
And because of that, that outline that we all hammered out over a weekend stayed relatively unchanged, I believe, for the duration of production.
Right.
Which was
and we didn't refer to Hamlet at all.
No.
It was just a handle that made Michael comfortable.
Exactly.
I remember Jeffrey said, okay, you got to go through Hamlet and you got to put as many lines from Hamlet in the movie as you can. And we went through all of Hamlet. I was like, no, this isn't working. Forget it.
But we all said, okay, we have to have our to be or not to be moment. And we knew there was like a pin in the storyboard, the story outline. Like to be or not to be, what is that moment? What is that moment? It was the very last thing that we did in the movie story-wise was Rafiki hitting Simba across the head.
That was a key.
That was Irene's idea.
Key beat. Yeah.
Yeah. We are near the end of our time, which I'm sad to say, because it's been so great talking to you guys and hearing your stories. I'm not exaggerating when to say that you all have affected culture on the planet Earth. If you want to, you can go see Lion King in one of 8 cities tonight. Beauty and the Beast is playing in Liverpool tonight. Pretty much everything you've worked on is out there in a big way in theater and consumer products, in live action remakes, which is a topic for a whole nother discussion. And yes, and it is remarkable the amount of creativity and energy that kind of came out of that studio in that time, and still is. I mean, you're all involved in some projects that are really interesting these days. So not to say that it's not still rolling on, but we do feel really lucky to have been there. I want to close with maybe a question you get all the time, which is we probably have hundreds of students listening in and hundreds of young people. They've heard about your successes, they've heard about your failures. And I always wanted to ask what your advice would be. And that's a really hard question. I often hate it when people ask it, but I'll ask you anyway, because there's a lot of kids out there that look to you as their mentors and as their role models in animation. If you could speak to them directly, which you are, what would you say to them? Ron, do you have an opening salvo on that?
It's tough because things are so different now. The world is so different and animation is so different. When I started at Disney, or even when I wanted to work at Disney when I was 9 years old and I saw Pinocchio, and that was my dream. And I grew up and I never ever met anyone that had the same dream. I mean, I thought, am I the only one in the world like this? Until I went to California, I came to Disney and suddenly I met people. And that was so exciting. It was like all these people, it's like, I always describe it like close encounters where these people, isolated people from different parts of the world sort of come together with the same dream.
The mashed potatoes.
I think it's bigger now. There are a lot more people that want to do it, which is really exciting. And there are a lot more opportunities. I mean, at that time, Disney was kind of the only place really there was to do that kind of thing. Features there were Disney features, and that was about it. So now, I mean, I'll pass it on, because in terms of the world today and how to achieve that dream, I mean, what other people say is the best way to go about it.
John Musker, any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't, there's different paths. Certainly there's many resources that we didn't have now. There's many books, you know, you can look at these films, all that sort of thing. And people should do that. I would just say in general, try and find your own voice, try and figure out what it is that moves you, what engages you. Work really hard, you know, just, you've got to, and be your own worst critic. You know, when you put your work out there, you've got to, you know, be willing to take criticism, show it to other people. We're working in an art form where it relies on an audience's reaction to what you're doing. So you've got to be vulnerable enough to expose what you're doing and listen to what people might have to say, and then sort of edit, and then just really try and work hard and play well with others.
Yeah, boy, that's good advice. That's really good advice.
I would suggest people to not give up, because it can be a long time getting in. I worked on like 3 films that never made it to the screen, you know, and that's a lot of years and a lot of work put in. And, you know, sometimes it'd be asked, is this really worth it? You know, and it's like, yeah, but I love it. You know, so it's like, if you love it and you really want to make it happen, you might have to be really patient and really dogged in.
Yeah, which I think all of you have been at
and
different
do jobs, maybe take jobs that don't immediately seem like they're going to be your dream that you really want to do, but somehow it's connected and it's going to help you move your way into it. You know, I just say, don't give up.
Yeah. Same here. I would say, you know, so many doors will close, you know, before they open, but it's like those doors close, that proverbial window opens, but sometimes doors keep closing, and finally it's just one really slams. Let the wall fall down and then look at the view and see what's out there. So much more, you know.
Beautifully
said.
So
be open, but also be kind and respectful. I think that is, it's sad how that can permeate a working environment. So, you know, the golden rule is a pretty good rule, I'd say. So
true. Gary Trousdale, particularly for the kids that maybe draw differently from someone else, who are coming from special effects, who are Halloween enthusiasts, what's your advice?
My advice is stay flexible. You know, I went in, like a lot of people here, going through CalArts, wanting to be an animator, wanting to be a character animator, and that was what I wanted. And different opportunities presented themselves, and like with Brenda, when Joe said, "Have you ever thought of stories?" Like, keep an open mind to that kind of thing. Stay flexible. I mean, maybe you'll find that you like painting better than you know, drawing or rigging or model building, or you know, whatever it is you're going to do. There's a lot of different departments, a lot of different aspects to animation. Stay flexible, and you know, you might find that you're better at something else than you think.
Lorna, what's your 2 cents on this?
Well, I'm mentoring an art center student right now who's a tremendous visual development painter who wants to go into story. So I'm just saying, let's see where this goes. I'm happy to do. She's wonderful, and I'm giving her as much time as I can. But I think that what Brenda was saying, the idea of rejection and failure, which can be soul crushing, and this is a world that if you don't have the passion and desire to keep going, you will be swept away, and we don't want that. You have to look at those failures as just stepping stones to greater understanding, greater knowledge and wisdom. And you got to be in the game, or you got to stay in the game, or you won't. And you know, like you've all said, find out what that passion may be. You may start out in one area and something else blossoms, but you know, never give up. You got to be in the game.
Beautifully said. Kirk Wise, what do you think?
Well, this was some advice that I actually gave a writing group a number of months ago, when I realized that in the entire kind of arc of my career, trying to, you know, establish a career in animation, I never had a fallback plan, ever. I strongly advise against fallback plans because it never occurred to me, even during difficult times or times when I was struggling, that I was ever meant to do anything but this. You know, the desire to create characters and tell stories and entertain superseded everything. And there was never a moment where, you know, thank goodness, where, you know, my parents never said, well, you know, maybe you should get a degree in business just so you have something to fall back on.
Mm-hmm.
Thank God nobody ever said that to me. Because I think that makes it too easy.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Rob Minkoff.
Well, one of my favorite pieces of advice was actually something I heard from one of our teachers, the legendary Teehee, who we would be in this big room, this big design room, which had floor to ceiling windows, but they put reflective surface on it so it wouldn't get too hot. And students would constantly walk by the window, checking themselves out in the reflection. And Teehee said, I never want to catch any of you doing that. You know, he said, don't look in a mirror, look through the window to the world around you.
Oh, that's great.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful, and a lovely closing statement. I can't thank you all enough. I think it's no exaggeration to say I love you guys and have been really honored to work with you all. And thanks for imparting your wisdom and your stories today. We could go on for hours and hours and hours. I'll end with my best advice, which for a producer was from Robert Watts, who produced some of the original Star Wars movies and Roger Rabbit. He said the producer hires the best people he possibly can and then does exactly what they tell him to do. And that's been kind of my marching orders and why I like to hang out with you all, because you make me look better. Thanks to all of you. Thanks for you guys listening in. Thanks for to Spark for hosting us today. I hope we can do this again sometime soon. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.